So I looked up the definition of philanthropist. It says a person who seeks to promote the welfare of citizens, especially through the generosity of money and other services to the good of others. You all should be happy to know that we have a sold-out crowd. A waiting list is quite long. There were 2 young ladies who were just trying to get a seat. I hope the staff got them a seat. Our staff does a great job, so if somebody ends up sitting on top of you, it's because we're trying to get everybody in here. But thank you all so much for being here to support City Club. I think Josh is going to do a great job with this panel. I was supposed to introduce Josh, but I'm probably not going to. How many people in this room already know Josh? Yeah. So if you don't know him, you can look it up. That saves me a few seconds. He's got a great panel coming, and I'm going to get out of their way and let him get up here so we can get started this afternoon. Come on, Josh.
That is good. Thank you very much. It is good to see so many friends here today, but also a little nerve-wracking to see so many in our field together. So I hope that we give you a great discussion today and that you leave inspired. That's the most important thing today, because I think right now, this time in the world, it can feel a little bit hard to fully engage in filling our soul, to feeling really good about all the good things around us. And sometimes we're just racing from one thing to the next thing just to kind of keep moving. Mass shootings, the political tenor and gridlock, hurricanes, earthquakes, fires, nuclear threats and tensions with North Korea, terror attacks, untenable municipal finances, and Twitter. And so all this news, nationally but also locally, can be challenging. And it can make it more difficult to fill our soul and remember the small moments, the little things that really matter, but also the bigger picture, what we're part of, the opportunities and the good that's happening right around us. So you didn't know this, but today is actually a therapy session for all of us. Mark this one down. It's a reprieve from what ails us and to come together, but also a call to action, a call to do something. What fills our souls? How can we fight back philanthropically against all this bad news to drive for something better? So I think that it's important sometimes to put things in perspective, kind of reminder. Now, Hamilton is an unbelievable musical, which I was lucky to see recently. It was the best ever. But it also helped to put some perspective about what we're facing. And that the issues that we're facing today probably aren't bigger than what Alexander Hamilton and the founding mothers and fathers faced back then, as they spoke up and spoke out to fight for liberty against a nation that applied taxes and tyranny. Yet while they're heroes today, the founding mothers and the fathers, most of them, that their dream to create a better country for all, a brighter future, was in vain, there was lots of naysayers, lots of people saying, they can't do it, this is crazy. How can we take on this great superpower across the ocean? Yet they persevered. Even when people said they couldn't, they said they could. They persevered, winning the war and building what is really the greatest nation. Yes, we face issues and challenges. We're far from perfect, but we're on a path towards something better. And in spite of naysayers, just as the founding fathers and mothers did, we're going to open hearts and minds. But no different was the voice of the relentless call to nonviolence of Mahatma Gandhi, or the compelling voice of Rosa Parks, who would simply not be moved, but moved an entire country. The accented voice of JFK telling us, we choose to go to the moon, not because. The bluntness of Eleanor Roosevelt, who told it like it was and why it had to be changed. But even the soft but very stern voice of Sister Rosemary and Misericordia, who reminds us that there's a place for everyone in society, and we are better for it. And my friend Father Foley, founder of Cristo Rey, his optimistic voice, con fuerza, reminding us that every child has a right to work and study for a great education. And today I'm pleased that we have 3 people on this panel whose prophetic voices call us to something better and something that'll make the world a better place. And they're right here in Chicago, but their voices are often heard across the nation. Today's panelists are people who I believe are pushing us to think about being something better, doing something more, each in a distinct and powerful way with their distinct voice. So I want to invite the panel to come up here, and as you're coming up here, I'm going to talk about them a little bit. But I also want to tell you all, because this is, we're accountable here for being part of this. It's called action. On your table, there's stacks of envelopes. I ask each one of you to take one of those. All you have to do is write your address on there and send it to me, or pass it to someone on your way out. Part of my team will collect it if you get the City Club employees. And you write down, based on when you hear these panelists talk, about how you're inspired to change or to do something more in this coming year because of their prophetic voice or some call to action, what you're going to do differently. And next year, right before the panel, I'm going to send these out to you as a reminder. And I will even read mine publicly, which could be difficult. But accountability is a key at the City Club, so we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard. Now, I could read you the bios of all the folks up here, but a lot of you know them. John Canning helped build the private equity industry here in the country, one of the largest firms. Civic and philanthropic giant, great friend to many. Liz Thompson, right from here in Chicago, Cabrini Green, went to Purdue, an engineer, had a big corporate job, left it to found a great organization called City Year right here in Chicago. Now she runs her family foundation. I can tell you about Steve Solomon, who's just a regular figure on the civic and philanthropic scene, helped write the book really on civic or on corporate philanthropy here in Chicago and nationally, and a great friend. But instead, I'm gonna actually read a couple quotes. Now, so these quotes are either actual or compendiums. So the author took a little liberty on some of these, which I think speaks to their voices. So John Canning first. This philanthropic stuff is a selfish act. I get so much out of it. I could move to Florida, talk about health issues, my golf handicap. I'd be miserable. Giving personally your own money is healthy. Everyone should do it because it changes how you think about philanthropy. Liz Thompson. My mom had no money. She raised 6 kids in Cabrini Green. All are successful. She gave us unconditional love. That is philanthropy too. Mom, I'm leaving Ameritech. I'm going to be the founding director of City Year, Chicago. You're leaving a good job, corporate job, good pay and everything else? And you're going to make half what you make now? But Mom, I'm sorry. I need to do this. I'm going to change the world. I always knew you would. It's not about making time. That's what time is there for, helping others. And Steve Solomon. Corporations don't live in a bubble. They live in a community. A company's success is tied to its community success. Collaboration is the name of the game. It is hard when someone says, give me a board member, just anybody, because it's not about just getting a person for your board. It's about finding someone who has passion for your program or your mission. And so I think those kind of give a good background on each of them. And so I'm going to jump in with a few questions so they can talk about their own philanthropic views and their thoughts and how they got to where they are. So I want to start with an opening one. I'm going to go back in time here a little bit. So get those memories going backward, not too far. But certainly part of philanthropy is about just finding time, right? It's just about creating time. But the other part is learning about philanthropy. It's not easy. This isn't something you just turn a switch on and start doing. When was your earliest memory of philanthropy? When did you recall thinking about doing something philanthropic or looking back and say, that was a kind of a pivotal experience in my life, whether when you were young and more recent, around philanthropy?
Who do you want to start?
Liz, you go ahead. Listen.
So when I gave Josh that quote, I told him it makes me cry every time I said it. So this is no exception.
Me too.
So thanks, Josh.
Me too. I'm sorry, Don. I'm sorry.
So forgive the tears. They just go with the territory, especially on this topic. I think about, so the origin of that quote in terms of my mom saying to me, when I declared to her that I was going to take a 50% cut in salary and change the world, and when she said, I always knew you would, the origin of that stems from the fact that I believe that I was raised by the masters of the universe. My dad worked for a printing company, lost his job before I was born, and so by the time I was born, the last of 6, he was unemployed and had turned to alcohol as a comfort. So I didn't know the same dad that my older brothers and sisters did, but I hear he was, basically my brothers and sisters tell me that I married my dad, tell me that the guy that I married is in fact exactly who my dad was, and I just didn't know that dad. But my mom was a master of the universe. And so when I think about my earliest thoughts of philanthropy, there are 2 thoughts. One is in thinking about the unconditional love that she gave everyone. And so for me, philanthropy is about so much more than just writing a check. It really is about giving of yourself. And so my earliest memory was of her giving of herself to everyone. And then my next earliest memory is when my then boyfriend's grandmother wrote a check in my senior year at Purdue for $600 so that I could go back to Purdue. And without that $600 check, I would have never gone back for my senior year and more than likely may have never graduated from college. These 2 acts, unconditional love and a small amount that would change my life, are the 2 earliest memories I have of philanthropy.
It's beautiful. Yeah. John or Steve, an early memory? Okay.
Yeah, I was, when Josh and I were talking about this, he said, what was the first, do you have a good memory? And how many here remember watching BJ and Dirty Dragon on WGN in the mornings? A few of us. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.
That was like something I watched every day after school. It was on, and they always said you have to hold your muscular dystrophy telethon or their carnival, right? So I told my parents, I said I was probably 8 or 9 at the time, I said, we're gonna have an MDA carnival in the backyard. And they're like, okay, sure. What are you gonna do? I'll figure it out. So we made flyers up, we put it in the neighbors, my mom and dad were like coaching me through this. How, are you gonna have any games for people to play? It's a carnival. Oh yeah, great idea. So, and so the day came, we probably had maybe 30 or 40 people show up. We made a whole $19.58, which was good, I thought, for an 8-year-old. And we cleaned up the carnival. I proceeded to put my money into my piggy bank because that's what, that's what you do with cash, right? And we got a letter from BJ and Dirty Dragon saying, hey, we know you held your carnival. Did you forget to send the check? And as an 8-year-old, I didn't know what a check was, and so I showed it to my folks, and they're like, yeah, we didn't know what you did with the money. Well, I didn't have much in my piggy bank to begin with, so we took everything that was in there, I gave it to my folks, they wrote a check and sent it in. But I think what I learned from that experience was that it's good. It's easy to bring other people in to do things for a good cause, right? And I'm just fortunate enough to work for a company like Exelon that allows me to do that every single day. And if it wasn't for my parents, I think, nudging and guidance, they never told me what to do, which I gave them a lot of credit for. With the carnival, they really were the ones who kind of helped, I think, point me in this direction. And I think the work I do with Chicago Shakespeare, we do with United Way at Metro Chicago in our Stay in School program, it's so refreshing and inspirational to see when you bring people together with a common cause, the change you can make in people's lives. And that's my and thank you. Josh told me all week he's going to talk about.
So I couldn't believe when Steve told me the story, and so I actually Googled. I'm like, was it really like carnival? You held a carnival in the back? Sure enough, I found the banner for these things. I just want to make sure that Steve has a copy of that. Just to listen, we check facts here. This is fact-based stuff. No fake news here. This is real deal. No Twitter either.
I'm going to kill him.
So cool. So cool.
John, how about you?
So. I look at it a little different way. I can remember the time I decided to go from passive philanthropy to actually active involvement. And I think you know the story where
yes, I love it.
In 1994, there was a little boy named Eric Morris who was thrown off the top of a building in Ida B. Wells, and the story went that he was a good kid, came from a good family, but the gang guys asked him to rob and he wouldn't do it. So my wife saw this story, called the local police precinct. They put us in contact with the Covenant on 39th Street, which is right next to Holy Angels School. The nuns at that time were pretty much running the school. And we said, look, we'd like to do something for this family. Can we come down and meet them? And they said, yeah, sure. And then we got down there, and they said, we tried to contact the family. The family's not as represented. The father's in jail on drugs. The mother doesn't want to come and see you. But we have another idea. Would you consider giving some scholarships to some of our elementary school students who really want to go to school but can't afford to go? And we said, sure. So they picked out 7, and we just said, that's great. It was pretty inexpensive. We forgot about it. Then the kids, through the nuns, said, we want to meet you. And we showed up on Valentine's Day. They had a Valentine's Day party for us. And there were 7 kids, 5 of whom I'm still in touch with. And they held a Valentine's party. And they had one grandmother, and then it was primarily single-parent families. So we said, this school looks pretty amazing. And we got actively involved with the school. And it's the first time I'd really gotten actively involved, and I've been hooked ever since. And, if it wasn't for my wife spotting that story, who knows?
Is that soul-filling work or what? I mean, I just think that those stories, each one of them goes to the depth of why you are also active philanthropically, because it isn't just about finding time, it's about, really getting fulfillment. But there was in fact, Jay Doherty sent me an article last week from the New York Times about David Rockefeller's plan for philanthropy, which he knew a little bit about, and talked about his lifetime of work of preparing all these different things and being prepared for even beyond his life. But he talked about, he didn't use this word, but he talked about prophetic voices in his life that kind of helped him to think about philanthropy. And for him, it was Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, and just challenging him to think differently about it. Are there prophetic voices, either now or in past, that other philanthropists you see that kind of have helped you as you've gotten in to be more active in your philanthropy? People here in Chicago or even, beyond? Want to go ahead?
Yeah, in my case, there's no question who it is, Jim O'Connor.
Yes.
Jim O'Connor and I are now co-chairs, along with Monsignor Vilo, of a Big Shoulders Fund. But ironically, when I got involved with Holy Angels Catholic School, I started funding, and I'm not Catholic. As a matter of fact, the former cardinal used to call me the heathen, if you remember. We started realizing as kids got out of the Catholic school, they didn't have any good alternatives, especially at that time down on 40th and Martin Luther Drive. So 40th Street and Martin Luther King Drive. So we started exploring Catholic schools to develop scholarships, and we started developing scholarships for kids coming out of Catholic elementary schools to go to Catholic high schools. And I ran into Jim O'Connor, who was running Big Shoulders at the time, and one of the founders of Big Shoulders. I realized, they were doing the same thing. And I watched how Jim operated, and, they weren't words, it was action. Jim was going to these schools. He was tirelessly raising money. He was not taking any credit for it, hated to take credit for it. And he just set such a role model for me that, I would say he had a bigger influence on me than anybody.
A lot of us.
Yeah. And I'll keep in sort of in the same line of thought. Jim was the past CEO and president and chairman of ComEd. And John Rowe is really the mentor for me, and John is the retired CEO and chairman of Exelon Corporation. About 15 years ago, I was fortunate enough to start working with John on a regular basis. And he taught me a lot about philanthropy, a lot about giving back, and always quick to respond with an email, whatever time of day or night it was. But John taught me early on that it's not about the photo opportunity as a corporation. It's not about getting the credit. It's about helping those in need. And that is always something when I review or read a grant application that's ringing in the back of my head every time. And he said, there's a trick to this philanthropy thing. And I'm like, really? And he said, yeah. He goes, look for the win, 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 right? How do you make it a win for the organization you're funding? How do you make it a win for the people who are the clients or the recipients of those funds? How do you make it a win for our employees, right? We're fortunate, last year Exelon employees, and ComEd as a part of Exelon, gave back 171,000 hours back in community service, right? And how do you make it a win for everybody involved? And every time we meet with people, whether it's an existing partner, a new partner, those words really ring in my ears. And I'm so fortunate that, Anne took over for Frank Clark and Pramajori at ComEd. It's so a part of her DNA. She loves that work. And we're fortunate that Chris, who took over for John, Chris Crane, it's the same for Chris. Both of them, we have both of these stellar leaders who believe in the work, who believe in giving back, and it's just a part of who we are as a company now. And it takes time to build that, and I'm just fortunate enough that both of them, both the past leaders and current leaders, have believed in it for so long.
It's true.
Yeah, Josh, I've got several, so I'll try and keep it short. But, John and Jean Rowe are, no question about it, giants. And in a personal way, just in a personal demonstration of their commitment to giving. But also I think about my dear friend who's here in the audience, Chuck Lewis. Chuck has been a role model for me in terms of his active philanthropy, not just giving money, but doing everything that's required behind that. But then, I think about my husband, to be perfectly honest, who is probably the most generous human being that I know. Generous not only of what we have, but generous of spirit. And that comes from his grandmother, the same one that wrote that $600 check. And what she represents are the countless people that are in the church pews every Sunday writing a check or putting in $1 into that envelope. And that's philanthropy too. And so that is what inspired me growing up and what inspires me today. And there's one other couple whose name I won't mention because they really love to fly low under the radar, but they've taken their enormous financial wealth and dedicated it to making Chicago a better place. And so from $1 in a church envelope to, millions and millions and millions of dollars, these people have been role models for me across the spectrum.
We're lucky to have so many of those leaders and all of you as well, kind of on that front in the corporate sector, but also individuals. And I think that's leading to, Chicago has a great reputation for a city that really pulls together. But where do you, when you look across the spectrum, and we talked about the challenges and everything else, but so many opportunities come out of that, where do you see the most hope? Whether it's an activity that you're involved in, or, I know, Steve, you guys have built a lot of collaborations, or working with other foundations or individuals, or things that maybe people don't know about that really you're starting to see, watch this in a couple of years, get involved now. This is going to help Chicago be stronger. What do you think about, where would you share with everybody to get involved or to take a stand?
Sure. It's hard to look straight across the table at Wendy DeBow, who is the president of United Way of Metropolitan Chicago. About 12 years ago, we started looking at philanthropy different at Exelon. And we said, what are the needs in the community? What can we help? What can we help solve? We don't have all the money in the world. We don't have all the resources in the world, but what can we bring, who can we bring together to help solve that issue? And at the time, graduation rates in Chicago were about 54% from high school, right? So we decided that is what we wanted to focus on. And we looked around the nonprofit community and said, who would be a good partner for us? Our employees do a lot of employee giving, and United Way is a recipient of some of those dollars. They can kind of pick and choose who they also give to, but we always give 50 cents to the dollar match back to United Way. And so we sat down with leadership at United Way at that time and said, how can we work together to help, improve graduation rates, improve attendance, make sure these kids are going from one grade to the next? And they said, great, let us go back and think about it. It took us about a year, which I wasn't too happy about, because I wanted that, we wanted to be able to get into the work. But what we created was a huge collaboration. It's United Way and Metro Chicago. We work with 6 nonprofit social service agencies in the communities where dropout rates are among the highest, attendance is among the lowest. These kids aren't progressing from one grade to the next. And we said, let's work together with the high schools in those communities. So we targeted a program to high school students. Since the program started, 27,000 kids have gone through it. Wow. 92% of those kids have graduated from high school. And the only reason that happened wasn't the money, wasn't the company. It was that we brought together the social service agencies, the schools. We did workshops for parents. We have our employees involved every Saturday during the school year, one Saturday a month during the school year. Our employees mentor about 70 of these kids. And we teach these kids those lifelong lessons. How do you write a resume when you don't have any job experience, right? They're like, I can't put anything on it. Well, have you worked in a club? Have you, volunteered somewhere? Can you take that? We can help you do that. And we bring in our HR folks to help them write resumes. And we hire some of those kids to work not only at the company at ComEd and Exelon, but also the 7 social service agencies that we work with as summer interns. So those kids who go through that program are not only seeing higher graduation rates, higher attendance rates, they're getting promoted to the next school year, but they're also getting taught those life lessons. And there's the employee part, as talked about win-win-win earlier, is that employee part is so important, but those 70 kids are really a fraction of the 2,000 students who go through that program, right? So those kids are getting additional social services that we can't provide them. We don't have the skill set to do that. But I think, when I think about philanthropy and I think about what works well in philanthropy, Josh, and John and Liz agree, I know, it's that collaboration. We can do so much more when you bring more people into the process.
Those numbers are huge, which I think is a big part why we're seeing CPS's graduation rates rise too, as part of a whole collective citywide effort, which is great. So, yeah, which is phenomenal to all of you that were part of that. Just to continue that question line, I was just thinking back, Liz, you talked about the justice nerve, and which I looked at her kind of quizzically when she said, the justice nerve. You just do it because it's the right thing to do. And John, you talk about philanthropy being a selfish act because you get so much out of it, which I think are both true. But how do you sort through kind of involvement and figure out which collaborations to be involved in or how to focus your time and effort, and which has got to be difficult?
Yeah, and it is, but you have to stick to a strategy. The strategy for our foundation, the Cleveland Avenue Foundation for Education, we really focus on the areas of transition, high school to college transition, and the organizations that really work with young people in that transition. The college to career transition and organizations like Braven that work with young people in that transition. And then we also work with young couples in the work and family balance. When you have the 2 that then becomes 3 or 4, and what that looks like, very similar to when you go from high school to college and it's a whole new world now that you bring little people in the group. But I wanted to echo too Steve's comment about collaboration and really focus on Chicago. Chicago is such an amazing city to be in terms of philanthropy. Josh, you know that, and everybody in the audience knows that. Our friends at Bridgespan Group did some research for the Packard Foundation not long ago to talk about ways that funders collaborate. And they came up with 5 different areas, but there are examples in Chicago of every single one of those areas. The one that's most exciting to me, really 2, where you have funders come together, like my friends at Kaplan or Brinson Foundation or the Circle of Service, that came together, did a landscape scan, and decided that we needed a whole new organization in Chicago, and thus the Partnership for College Completion was born, led by Kyle, my friend Kyle Westbrook here, or getting together with some other funders and deciding, you know what, there are not enough organizations that address that college to career transition, and identifying the Braven organization to say, this is who we want to get behind and support. That kind of work doesn't happen everywhere, but in Chicago, the collaboration between funders is so strong. That's probably what I'm most excited about.
How about you, John? Anything?
Well, it is very difficult to turn away really good, needed projects because they're not part of your strategy. Because I agree with Liz, you have to have a strategy to make smart investments. And at our foundation, it's inner city education, and it's abuse to women and providing services to abused women and their children. I've found a way, though, to deal with requests for things that I'm not necessarily going to support. I tell the requester that I'll be glad to send in a check equal to the amount of the check he sends to one of mine. And it cuts down a lot of phone calls. It's amazing how many people.
I'm going to try that.
We're going to try that.
It took me quite a while to figure it out.
That's the other part of the collaboration.
Yes,
exactly. We all focus on different
Strategy
things.
number one, sharing knowledge.
What is, there's a couple, I want to get some questions we have from the audience. If there's more, please bring them up. We got a whole bunch. There's people, I'll get these. I'm going to go through these here. So let's see. Jennifer Husband, Schools That Can, Chicago, a City Club member. Jennifer, you're right here. Hey, Jennifer, how are you? What's your best advice to new nonprofits in Chicago that are just starting up? What advice would you give them as they're forming and creating their program?
Well, I think it's not only new nonprofits. I think sometimes people, nonprofits, make the mistake of thinking X can afford it, so we deserve a piece of that pie, and asking with that attitude. And I think the burden of proof is on the nonprofit to find whatever that donor's passion is, and to make it a win-win, as you say, for that donor and for your institution. The other thing I think is outcomes. Outcomes are extremely important, especially with the new donor base we have in Chicago. It's, traditionally it was large corporations and their CEOs, wealthy families. We've got this whole wave of young entrepreneurs that are in businesses that didn't exist 10 and 15 years ago, some of them don't have roots in Chicago. And they're hard sells, and they're philanthropic, but they want to get actively involved. And you've got to show them that there's a payoff on the investment. And I think not-for-profits, especially new ones, have to keep those things in mind.
We're going on things, data and outcomes. If we don't have it, I think it's hard to get traction. I think you're right. I'm going to throw another one out here from Graham Grady. Graham, I see you back there from Taft Law Firm. He asked, how do we ensure the development, this is a great question, the next generation of donors and philanthropists? How do we ensure diversity at the input level?
Graham, can you expand on that real quick? Just a little bit more.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you all so much. When I look around this room, you mentioned that Chicago comes together. I mean, what a wonderful room of people that give back to Chicago and help address our most challenging issues. I commend each and every one of you.
Here, here.
That was supposed to give me time to explain myself. So first, I think it's really important. I wanted to ask you, how do we ensure the next generation of donors, the next generation of philanthropists? I've got this great mustache. I'm so out of touch with millennials and whatever the next generation is called. I have no clue as to how we get there. And then secondly, when you look around this room, and I mean this with all due respect to my colleagues, this room doesn't actually represent the majority of the people who are the beneficiaries of the grant making in Chicago. All right? So I look there and I say, it's imperative for us to incorporate, and you define diversity as you will for your organization. How do we actually get there? I know we all talk about it. We all have strategic plans. We all have policies, right? And I'm involved. I'm part of the problem as well as hopefully part of the solution. How do we really get there in terms of getting the input from the people who need our services and who, for me, it's important. When I was at Chicago Housing Authority, all all these policies coming down from Washington, unless you're listening to the people who are living in those buildings, you're not there, okay? We're not there. So it's really a question of how do we genuinely hear from the people whose problems we're working on trying to solve to infuse our grant making to be most effective.
I agree, Graham. Thank you for adding some more detail to that question. So it is a problem. I often describe to people that I know well, walking into rooms with other funders, talking about education in Chicago, and we know we're largely talking about black and brown kids, and yet I'm the only chocolate chip in the cookie when I walk into the room. I mean, this is time after time after time on a daily basis. So there's no question it's problematic. We understand where it comes from, right? You want the people at the table that have the resources in order to help impact change. But every time we neglect to speak to the people that we are serving, right, then the solution becomes further and further away from being the reality. And so I like to think of it as being very intentional about listening to the folks and being active in the work, right? So when John talks about going out to that school, your solution for a given issue is going to be radically different if you're in the place where the people you serve actually live and experience their lives. And so I encourage other funders all the time, again, financial resources are important, but until you are able to sit in the room with the people whose lives we're talking about, then you're not really in touch with what's going on. So I think more active philanthropy, Graham, is going to be the secret. And unfortunately, one of the disturbing trends now is for nonprofits to go more and more after the really large gifts. And so that complicates things because while I understand, having been on that side of the table, it's really a strategic move to go after people that can give you large gifts. But when you think back to the origins of an organization like the March of Dimes, for example, FDR encouraged people from all over America to give their dimes in order to help eradicate polio back in the 40s and 50s. And they did. And one of the grantees for that was Dr. Jonas Salk, as we all know now, the person that invented the vaccine for polio. We're not going to get to solutions like that when we're relying on one or two donors with those large checks. As much as we appreciate them, we've got to figure out how to get all the voices at the table so that we can have a much more national approach to resolving some of these issues, and a national approach that includes people of color.
And if I can add on to
Yes.
what Liz was saying, I think the engagement piece is crucial. One of the things that we do at Exelon is we do a National Volunteer Week, which is through the Points of Light, and we take 1 week out of April and make that our dedicated National Volunteer Week. This year it became National Volunteer Month. We did 335 projects, and we had about 4,000 of our 34,000 employees out in the field, in the communities that are important to us and that need that help. And I think it's getting the folks, for us, it's getting our employees into these communities, painting, landscaping, doing whatever it is, reading to kids, and creating that awareness of how important that community organization is to the local neighborhood. And what's been great about this is we'll go out and plant a community garden on the south side of Chicago, and we'll have maybe 40, 50 people show up. In this one instance, about half of those people were people who grew up in that community, were from that community, and many of them hadn't been back. And so what was great about that is we were able to kind of reconnect them through that program. They're able to go back, and in many cases, they're continuing going back and still volunteering with those nonprofits. Millennials these days, I have 2 at home, so I guess I can say this, are always on their phone, right? It's always click, click, click. And what our team at Exelon's been trying to do is make that employee giving campaign a lot easier to do. Put it on the phone, make it so it's something that's easy for them to participate in. And we just wrapped up our employee giving campaign, and our employees gave $8.1 million back into the communities. About 52% of our employees participate in that program. And a lot of it is creating that awareness. It's that connection to the people that you're actually helping. You can send a bazillion emails out. You can say this is what we should do from the top down. But what really matters is them seeing firsthand, like you said, Liz, how can I help those people who have the need?
And how can they be helpful to us?
Right, exactly right.
Right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Just spending time
Yeah.
with them can be transformative
Oh, yeah.
in ways that, no other experience can be for people on the other side.
Very
I think to your point, Liz, just that spending more time together talking about these issues and sharing what you're doing, going to different organizations and getting to know one another, communities, is going to help build the philanthropic sector overall, which I think speaks volumes, as Jackie said and Graham just said, that it is so encouraging to see so many people excited about taking on this challenge. I'm sure writing down your accountable sheets of what we're going to be graded on next year philanthropically, but that we have such a leg up on this, on all this. Unfortunately, we've run out of time already, but I think we're going to have a solution for that. But I want to start first by thanking all three of you for, one, being part of this and spending so much time preparing and being active in this, but also for the example you give for all of us in the work that you do philanthropically and helping to bring us together to solve all these issues. So a big round of applause for our panel.